Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. And I put a link into the chat. I'll do it one more time for folks. If they want to learn a little bit more about what we're doing, you'll be able to see like the overview of our program. And inshallah, this is a space for us at any time. So that's there. But Imam Fahim, excuse me, I'm gonna go back to this and I'll catch up on the recording later on. But
Yes,
inshallah,
sir.
well, I'm looking forward to the learning when I get back to it, and see you all next week, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alhamdulillah. All right. So we will begin this episode 7 here. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The last resurrection and the Renaissance. We're still inside. That's just such a big part of it. Sort of like the East Coast, West Coast. On the West Coast, pardon me, on the East Coast. I need everybody to mute themselves to check your mics and see that they're muted. On the East Coast, you have these smaller states. They're all broke up, small states all the way on that side. On the West Coast, you got California, which is, I'll call it at least 2/3, if not more, of the West Coast, right? Similarly, historically, in this master narrative that we're laying out, this part of it, that last resurrection and the Renaissance, it's just huge. So it has many states, you might say, to pass through. And so today, Imam W.D. Mohammed, and we begin our conversation about new language. We have already, but now we're formally putting our finger on the issue and the role of new language, inshallah. Let's see, I'm gonna ask one more time. Mute yourself, please. I don't know how to mute everybody. I guess I'll make sure I know how to do that next week. But today I don't know how to do it. So let's see. Sure. Yes. All right. So this is like the last page. It's like the last page that we finished on. Let me see if I can read it through without much elaboration. Why the black mind and the plain Muslim can't and couldn't just solve the monstrous problem. Because we're actually inside continue to talk about the ethics of the whole situation. Why Farad used methodology and why Farad used material, quote unquote, that could be deemed to be haram or somehow unethical and the like. And the Imam said, we took a quote from him saying, we need a sensible approach to solve the problem that we have in our life. This is no simple problem. We have a monstrous problem in our lives, and we need a sensible approach to it. Continuing, the reason the Negro couldn't and can't solve his problem is because he's using the tools, the mind that he became or has become, that is in combination, because it existed then and it exists now, right? The same mind can't solve the problem because the mind itself is the problem. So the tools in mind has become to solve it. In reality, he had to and has to become somebody else before he can solve the problem that is his self, his mutated identity. That is, the mutated identity is the problem. In order to change the problem, he has to himself change, right? And we quote Einstein in his statement, you can't solve problems at the same level of thinking that gave rise to it. And this is also why Farad's mythology, excuse me, I'm sorry, it is truly annoying that check your mic and see if you are not muted. I don't know what to. All right. Is that voice familiar? Who's that? Brenda? Let's see. Let me stop. I'm gonna have to stop the share because I have to find the source because it's irritating and distracting. So let's see. See if I can find how this mute button works. Okay. I'm sorry. I'll be editing all this portion out when I afterwards. Sorry, but whoever it is, apparently they are away from the computer. Why that? Georgetta's muted. Brenda's muted. Shakur is muted. Okay, who is this right here? I don't know who that is, but I'll find you. All right, I think that's it. So let's go back to Microsoft PowerPoint. All right. As long as I didn't mute myself. All right. All right. So again, so we ended my last comment at the Einstein quote, saying you can't solve problems at the same level of thinking that gave rise to it, right? That's a statement of fact, right? The same thinking that got you into a situation is not the thinking that's going to get you out of the situation. The same mind that got you into a situation is not the same mind that's going to get you out of the situation. Again, all this goes to what is the justification? What is the rationale? What is the moral support? And now I'm saying also the psychological and the logical and the moral support for the way that it was done, right? For all those reasons, right? So we say this is why Farad's mythological fantasies worked on certain people, because there are certain people in a condition that was peculiar to and amenable to the influence of the, I'll use this language, concoction that had been structured after the diagnosis and after the prognosis. Then this prescription, which is Farad's mythology, was given. And it was given to all, but the main targets for it were the dissatisfied. Okay. And this is why that prescription worked, because it manufactured for the Negro a new ego, a new self. That's a big, 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 big deal. It's like, I don't know. I think it's because it's just so far out of most people's way of thinking and consideration that I guess perhaps people just don't have a model inside of their mind to understand that. And that's not surprising, because this is a quote unquote one-time thing, effectively speaking, and especially as it relates to the people who are the subjects of the subject. It is yourself getting an understanding of yourself in a distorted and a mutated form, and then coming to understand how that distortion and mutation plays into your reformation. I mean, just constructing that sentence is a challenge, and none of what I talk about is intended as some kind of flex. It's like, no, that's how it needs to be seen in order to understand why does it work and why did it work. And we're going to be saying more about that. So let's just go on with this. So they work. That is Faraz's mythological fantasies, Yaqub's history, deportation of the moon, and all the rest of that. Why did it work? White man is the devil made on the island of Palana Petmos. Why did it work? It worked because they were manufactured for someone who already had a mutated identity. So just think about it. It's like, okay, listen to how I'm saying this so we can understand. Imagine the doctor stepping up, look, I already know you crazy. I'm just saying. All right, I already know you crazy. So it's no sense in me talking to you like you're a normal person. I need to speak to you from your craziness. There are quotes that I know. When I say quotes that I know, there's sources in Imam Muhammad's information that say when you're talking to somebody, if that person thinks that they're a camel, you have to talk to them like they're a camel. You can't talk to them, man. Look, you know you ain't no camel, man. Come on, cut that out, man. Get straight. No, I'm a camel. And if you think you're a camel and I'm trying to get to you and get into a dialogue with you so that there may be some possibility for change, I first have to speak to you as a camel. So, and this is nothing but what the Quran, alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, what Allah says in the Quran, never does he send a messenger to a people. I'm not confused about Messenger Muhammad and Elijah Muhammad and Prophet Muhammad. I'm not confused. He says, never does he send a messenger speaking the language of the people to whom he sent. You see, it's that subtlety, it's that nuance, it's that stop, pause, don't take it just one way, look at it. There's another way of seeing it, there's another angle, there's another perspective. When you see it, it becomes a key that you turn in a lock, and then something opens up to you, because you just gave it that extra twist, meaning change of perspective, and you get that. So those that he never was speaking the language of the people to whom he sent. And we think about it as the tongue, the French man goes to the French, and the Spanish man goes to the Spanish, and the German man goes to the German, and the Arab goes to the Arab. No, it's what is your psychological language? What is your see? Because there are English speakers who are Republicans. There are English speakers who are libertarians. There are English speakers who are Democrats. There are English speakers who are atheists. You have to speak to them in their language, which is inside their language, right? So in terms of the Negro, they were in a condition where their life was built out of fantasies. Not to forget the trauma, but because by the time Faraj showed up, Jesus, God, blonde hair, blue eyed Jesus, da 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 da, all of that. So the experimental clinic had quote unquote concluded formally, but the psychological work after the clinic was still exerting itself as intended on quote unquote the mind and the ego of the product of the slave plantation. So it had been reformed into, stick with my analogy earlier, I'm a camel, right? So it's like I believe myself to be whatever I believe myself to be, which was a product of that, though I don't know. I was a product of a system that was designed to make me be the way that I am right now, which is not in my best interest, but I don't know that. Okay, so I'm speaking, me, Fahim, right now. I'm speaking from the perspective of the condition of the Negro at the time of the coming of Farad with what he brought. So since that mind was already twisted, it was already mutated, it was already dehumanized, it was already whatever undone. Well, but it was still speaking. It was still living. It was still existing, etc. But it itself was born out of fantasies, mythology. That's what that mind was, the Negro mind and the slave plantation plus the experimental clinic that did all the things that it did to it. It created a mind called Negro. That Negro mind was a product of mythologies and fantasies. So the only way for it to really be reached is through the same. Some form of mythology, some form of fantasy, but a mythology and a fantasy that was in their favor or that tended towards sending them back or forward, you can take it either way, to the state that was lost in the processes that preceded Farad. That is the slave plantation and Jim Crow and all the lynchings and all the rest of that. Right? And the Jesus is God piece, the images. So it's like you need to erase all that and get to the base and then start from the base and build it up. That was what the Farad Muhammad, the Nation of Islam, that was what it was. That was the project. Okay. So let me read this line again. It says, they worked because, that is the fantasies, that strategy worked because of what I've just been explaining or trying to. They worked because they manufactured for the Negro a new ego self, which separated them from their mutated identity. Two things come to mind. I don't want to forget this idea again, that you can't reason people out of what they weren't reasoned into. Maybe write that down, own that, hold on to that. It's really important. You can't reason people out of what they weren't reasoned into. It's the third time. I'll keep this one on this. That's how important this is, in my view. You can't reason people out of what they weren't reasoned into. So that is, if you try to use reasoning on someone who has taken a position not based on their own reasoning, they're just whatever, infatuated, captured, cultified into it, So you have this cult leader, and I just love him. So this cult leader has captured their projections, and these people are projecting all their. In fact, I heard someone say the other that Trump. This is not a statement of my vote. I'm just calling it like I see it right now. In this case, like I heard it. It's like that Trump is the avatar of the white man's grievances. All right. Trump is the avatar of the white man's grievances. So it's like there are those who are projecting their grievances onto the hero, savior-like figure of Trump. That's not coming to Trump based on reasoning. That's coming to Trump based on emotional need, hunger, desire, appetite, grievance, whatever. And so he captures those projections. And so now everybody is in train, meaning they're hooked on Trump, right? And you could try to reason them out of that, but that's not going to work because they weren't reasoned into it. And it's the same for Kamala Harris. It's like there are those who have her as a cult-like figure and projecting onto her their hopes, aspirations, desires, Human beings do that, right? And so to try to reason those people, it doesn't matter, anyone. If they weren't reasoned into their position, then you're not going to be able to reason them out of that position. Okay. Likewise, the Negro wasn't reasoned into being a Negro. Come on, be a Negro. No, they weren't reasoned into being a Negro. They were mutated into being a Negro. So in order to get them out of being a Negro, you're going to have to mutate them out of the Negro. We got to go back to the earlier pieces where we covered all this in the John Cairns experiment, where literally this is how nature, this is how the natural law works. That's another thing that makes how can you say that makes a case for Farad's decision to do what he did in the way that he did it, scientifically and naturally and logically. There are so many reasons to support that. Okay, well, okay, so, okay, we don't do this. What are we gonna do, right? So it's like no, it's a real strong case once you understand it. So the people, but people who again who hate Farad for their own reasons, they too, the ones that I'm imagining, having in my mind as I say this, they weren't reasoned into hating Farad. Okay, some of them they just it's just bidah bidah bidah. He's evil, Satan. He's a Dajjal, whatever. Okay, but you don't have this part of the story that I'm telling you right now. Let's go on. So the point is, why did it work? Why did Farad's prescription work? One of the signs of the fact that it was the right prescription because it brought about a change in them like no other effort brought about a change in them. The partial efforts, the partial efforts of all the others, the minds that were involved with and the strategies that were involved with trying to ameliorate and improve the condition of the Negro, each one of them had a part of the solution, right? But they were necessary but not sufficient. And so Farad created a composite of the Father Divine, the Noble Drew Ali, the George Washington Carver, not George Washington, the Booker T. Washington, E.B. Du Bois, others as such. And here was the product. The product was the doctrine, the ideology of the Nation of Islam, and the apparatus that went along with it. Yeah, okay, and for as far as that's concerned, the rest is history. Now, so let's move on. So it says they worked because they manufactured for the Negro a new ego self. That was necessary. It's just like retrofitting, right? Kind of like retrofitting, rehabilitating, restoration. I even thought about people who suffer, broken bones and the like. Sometimes, if those broken bones and they were healed in quote unquote in the wrong way, they got fixed in their healing in the wrong way. Sometimes doctor have to break the bone again. You have to break it so that it can, how can you say, more correctly bond and grow, right? Okay, so it's the same thing. Oh, it was broke already. Well, yeah, now you got to break it again to do it was mutated. You had a mutated identity. Yeah, we need to mutate that mutated identity so that we can get it back to normal. Brother and sister, that's what has happened. That's what happened. And that's like a one-off, that's a one-time thing. It's like, okay, so now we know. So let's go over here and do that. No, it don't need to be done again. It can't be done again. It's already been done. And it only needs to be done this one time. That's where we are. So, okay. So now we can say it unplugged us from the matrix. That was what Farad's mythology, the Nation of Islam, its apparatus, its ideology, its methodology, it was unplugging us from the matrix. That's an analogy that works and that's proper for us in the situation. All right. Then it was that resultant identity, that is the identity that was created from the mutated identity, that is created, your mutated identity / Negro. All right, now you got to take the Negro, unplug it from the matrix, and then that unplugged Negro, now you have to rebuild it, rebuild it, cause it to grow into its normal, natural reality and potentiality. So then it was that resultant new identity that provided the prerequisite independence of mind. Just think about it. Just think about it. The Negro could not think for himself. The Negro did not have his own mind. The Negro had no concept of thinking differently than the master or the world and the other Negroes around him, which were in also, and it continues today, all in relative terms, right? No matter how intelligent, how wealthy, quote unquote, African Americans, blacks, quote unquote, but you're still Negroes if you're not thinking independently. Really, you're still that same Negro. You just on a different socioeconomic plane or what have you. But in terms of the mind that you have and the decisions that you make and the boundaries that you conform to without someone dictating them to you verbally, actually, but you already know. So they don't have to tell you don't do it. You already know not to do it. You know what I'm talking about. You know the type that I'm talking about. They're all over the media. They're all in different domains, entertainment, sports, news, all that. But let's move on. So what the Nation of Islam gave was the prerequisites of independence of mind. We had a mind that can't nobody tell us nothing. I mean that's a hell of a mind. It's like, no, that's the white man's knowledge. That's the devil's knowledge. Look, I was enrolled in the engineering program. I mean, it had been accepted. UC Berkeley engineering program. But then as soon as I got that supreme wisdom, so I got that Nation of Islam message, man, I left that devil's university. That was me then. So it's like, and I have no regrets at all. But the point is that prerequisite of independence of mind, it was by the prescription that Farad gave. It's like, who has that power? What has that power to pull us away from what people, quote unquote, would give their right arm for, right? It's something just more valuable. Okay, then it was the resultant new identity that provided the prerequisite independence of mind that it needed to foster its own reformation. So you had to come into an independence of mind before you could start progress back to your original self. And that's not a small statement, brothers and sisters. That's not a small statement. The idea of coming back to your original self. You'd have to go back to just put it. Let me see if I can simply state it. That erase the effects of all of that past, and get back in touch with your fitr. Get back in touch with alama adam al asma'a kullaha. Get back in touch with the nature of you as a human creation from the creator of the heavens and the earth. All that other stuff was in the way, right? If you ever had your old battery scenarios for our cars, you ever had the battery died and you're trying to get the battery started, you open up the hood, you look at the battery, and on the two poles on the battery, it got gunk. You got gunk all over it. It's like, well, that's not because none of the connections are connected. No juice is coming through it. So you have to clean all that off so that the power of the battery can reach the machinery, right? Okay, well, that's like what happened with us, the Negro. There's so much of the Negro-ness just covered up, obliterated, blocked out the force and the power and the potential of the original nature. And so Farad and the Nation of Islam, what it did was get the gunk out. Though it used some heavy acid to get it done, but the idea is that it was fostering a reconnection with our original potential. So let's go with this. So that was the beginning. That's why we call it the first resurrection, right? You might remember this scene from The Matrix when Morpheus he asked Neo, who was just introduced to whatever that white place was, the platform, it's the Matrix. So he asked and answered his question, what is the Matrix? And he said it's control. The Matrix is a computer-generated dream world built to keep us under control in order to change a human being into this, right? And that was when, no, I don't believe. Neo was kind of like, his knees are just totally wobbling on this. This can't be true, right? He said, no, yeah. The machines created a system where they could take the energy in the human being to power their world and make that, quote, human being think that they are really alive, when all the time they are connected to a system that's designed to use them to fuel their world. That is, the machines use the human beings deluded by this computer-generated dream world to believing that they're actually living somewhere, when all the time you are a battery in our system. That's the reality. I'm gonna walk you through a couple of pictures of that. I'll do that after you see that literally was the mindset of the leaders and their intention then and now for Negroes, right? It's called the Mud Seal Doctrine. And this is from Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, right? So this is the formal expression of it, right? The Mud Seal Doctrine says, when a house is being built, the single most important piece of the framework is the first wood beam hammered into place to anchor the foundation. The piece is called the mud seal. The seal plate that runs along the base of a house and bears the weight of the entire structure above it. The studs and the subfloors, the ceilings and windows, the doors and roofing, all the components that make it a house are built on top of the mud seal, right? In a caste system, the mud seal is the bottom caste that everything else rests upon. A Southern politician declared this central doctrine from the floor of the U.S. Senate in March 1858. He says, quote, in all social systems, there must be a class to do the menial duties, to perform the drudgery of life. This is Senator James Henry Hammond of South Carolina, what he told to his fellow senators. He says, that is a class requiring but a low order of intellect and but little skill. Its requisites are vigor, docility, fidelity. Such a class you must have. It constitutes the very mud seal of society. He exulted in the cunning of the South, which he said had found a race adapted to that purpose. To her hand, our slaves are black, of another and inferior race. The status in which we have placed them is an elevation. They are elevated from the condition in which God first created them by being made our slaves. Okay, that's the mud seal doctrine. That's a statement of these people, this James Henry Hammond and all of his ilk, We are the machines, like the machines in the movie The Matrix. The human beings that we have dehumanized are like the batteries that give life to the totality of our system. But our biggest job is to keep them docile and infidelity, meaning faithful to, but also faithful to this system that exploits them. But we want them to not see it as an exploitation. We want them to see it as an elevation, right? Because you were created worse than the condition that we put you in. And we have to keep you vigorous, right? So you can do the work and so that you can procreate and so that we can keep having our life as it is, and you stay where you are supposed to be, because that's where you've been cast into. Just think about it. When we say movies, the cast of characters, meaning that's your character. Stay in your role, right? All right. So you should be able to see very clearly the analogy between the matrix and the mud seal, and between now as we go forward, Neo, like the Negro. So now, yeah, let's just go with that. So this is, you can remember that scene. So I want you to understand in terms of the pathway as it relates to the resurrection, to the Renaissance and the like. And we're still only in the part of just understanding why Farad had to do it the way he did, or the case for Farad doing what he did the way he did, and how that process was a fundamentally necessary process in order to get to the next step. Because this is all this right now is just talking about why Farad did what he did and why the Nation of Islam was necessary under the conditions. And then, but not until after, mashallah, Imam Muhammad, even my conversation is all based on what Imam Muhammad has said. So this is retrospect now with the new understanding from the Imam. It's like, and I say new for us, it was 40 years ago. So I say new, it's not like, yeah, today we understand. No, it's 40 years ago. Just think about that, right? And 40 years ago, that's 1984, right? So that's almost a decade after the Imam started this process, and 35 years, 35 years. And so when Farad has started this process, so I'm only explaining a process that, well, had to be formulated over 100 years ago. 100 years ago, it was 1924, right? Farad dropped it, i.e., it started in his statement July 4th, 1930. Okay, so the plan was already in place 100 years ago. It just started working. Except, so wow, I mean, just get your head around that. It's very important. So even so, what I'm talking about right now is still just about that part, to where, okay, why were we in the Nation of Islam? What happened when we were in the Nation of Islam? What was the purpose of being in the Nation of Islam? Blah, blah, blah. And the movement is, okay, slavery did what slavery did, and slavery produced the Negro. Then the Negro was what he was, and now the Negro needed to be saved from being a Negro in order for the Negro to be able to save himself. So the Nation of Islam was designed to save the Negro from being a Negro, so the Negro could learn how to save himself. Okay? And yes, God's hand is in the whole thing. And one of the ways that you quote unquote see God's hand in it, if for those who have a question about that, it's like, okay, this is what happens in nature, which we talked about with the lactase piece, and we got some other analogies for that too. And what are the laws of nature? The laws of nature is the will of God. So if something happens in accordance with the laws of nature, it is happening in accordance with the will of God. It was like it was built into Allah's plan, such that when conditions reach this, then this is what's going to happen after that. And so these conditions, the conditions that we came to, that is labeled and called, because Negro is a condition. So we came into that condition called Negro, then that triggers a whole nother set of events that was designed to correct things that Allah himself knows by his will and has by his will said this is wrong. When this wrong reaches this level, then things have to be turned around. And these are the mechanisms that I use to turn it around. If something gets mutated, I have a transcription methodology in the DNA to mutate the mutation to get it back into the proper order. For I, Muhammad, represented the mechanism, the catalyst for the beginning of the, how can you say, the remutation. Maybe we can even say the permutation, the remutation of, and this is just the beginning of that part of it. So you remember this scene, you know, when Neo he first kind of pushed himself up out of the jelly womb of whatever it was. Then he looks around and sees